The scent of pine resin and burning sage coiled through the stone corridors of the Northern Dominion Palace, clinging to every shadow like a secret waiting to be told. Beyond the narrow window of the west corridor, Sarah could hear the drums, deep, primal, rhythmic, calling the packs to assembly. The blood moon was rising, and with it, the mating ceremony that would bind alliances and forge the future of the realm. For alphas and betas, attendance was an honor. For omegas, it was forbidden. Yet here she stood, locked away in the servants' passage, where moonlight barely reached, her fingers wrapped around the cold iron bars of the window grate. Below, in the grand courtyard, she could see them, the chosen ones. Female wolves adorned in silk and silver, their laughter echoing up through the stone like music from a world she would never touch. They moved with confidence, with belonging, their wolves steady and strong beneath their skin. Sarah pressed her forehead against the bars, feeling the bite of metal against her skin. "You understand why this is necessary, don't you, Sarah?" Lady Morwen's voice had been velvet soft when she'd led her here hours ago, her grip firm but masked as maternal care. "With your instability, it would be cruel to let you attend. False hope is the cruelest kind of torture." Instability, that was the word they used, the polite word. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. In a world where strength was measured by the completeness of one's shift, Sarah was the flaw in the bloodline. Her wolf had never fully emerged, only halfway, caught between human and beast, trembling beneath her skin like something afraid to be born. They called her unbalanced, weak, a shadow of what an omega should be. Her father had protected her while he lived, reminding the pack that even partial wolves deserve dignity. But since his death 3 winters past, Lady Morwen, her appointed guardian, had been quick to remind everyone, especially Sarah, exactly where she belonged. Hidden, silent, useful only when summoned. Sarah tugged at a strand of her pale hair, so unlike the rich dark tones of the northern pack. Another mark of her otherness. Another reason to keep her tucked away, like a shameful secret. On the narrow stone ledge beside her rested her only inheritance, her mother's moon-marked pendant, a silver crescent cradling a small star. Sarah lifted it now, feeling its familiar weight settle against her palm. "Remember, Starlight," her mother had whispered before fever took her when Sarah was barely 6. "Even the smallest light can pierce the darkest night." She'd worn it every day since, finding strength in its gentle pressure against her heart, a reminder that she was her mother's daughter, even if she could never be the wolf the pack demanded. The drums grew louder, more insistent. Voices rose in harmony below. The ceremony was beginning. Destiny was being decided. Without her. Always without her. A soft, hurried knock rattled the corridor door. "Sarah?" The voice was hushed, urgent. "Are you in there? I don't have much time." Sarah's breath caught. She rushed to the heavy wooden door, glancing nervously toward the darkened stairwell beyond. "Mira, you shouldn't be here. If Lady Morwen finds you, then she'll have to deal with me." The door swung open, and Mira slipped inside, her dark eyes flashing with defiance as she thrust a bundle of fabric into Sarah's arms. "I'm not letting you miss another ceremony because of that, Viper." The bundle unfurled into a dress, simple but beautiful, the color of storm clouds and moonlight, far finer than anything Sarah had worn in years. "Mira, I can't." "Yes, you can." Mira's fingers were already working at the buttons of Sarah's faded grey work dress. "Your father was an elder of this pack. You have as much right to be there as anyone." "You know it's not that simple." Sarah clutched her pendant, her voice dropping. "The last time I tried to attend a gathering, they—" "You were 15 then," Mira interrupted, her voice softening. "We're adults now. Besides—" She paused, her expression shifting to something between excitement and fear. "This isn't just any ceremony, Sarah. The Alpha King himself is attending tonight." Sarah's heart stuttered. Abel Nuke, the Alpha King of the entire Northern Dominion. They said he had never taken a mate because no one could stand beside him. They said he ruled not with cruelty, but with absolute, unyielding control. They said he noticed everything. And tonight, he would be choosing his queen. Sarah's hands trembled as she looked down at the dress, then back at the narrow window, where torchlight was beginning to spill into the passage from the great hall's open doors. Music swelled. Destiny called. And for the first time in her life, Sarah wondered if she dared to answer. The dress fit perfectly, as though Mira had known all along that this night would come. Sarah's fingers shook as she fastened the last clasp, the fabric whispering against her skin like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "You look like you belong," Mira whispered, squeezing her hand. "Because you do." Before Sarah could respond, Mira was gone, slipping back through the shadows toward the ceremony, leaving Sarah alone in the torchlit passage. The great hall doors stood open just ahead, golden light spilling across ancient stone. Music drifted out, haunting, ceremonial, woven with voices that had sung these rites for generations. Sarah could smell incense and winter roses, could feel the pulse of power that came when so many wolves gathered in one place. She should turn back, should return to her locked corridor, and wait for this night to pass. But her feet carried her forward. She stopped just outside the doorway, pressing herself against the cold stone column, where shadows still clung. From here, she could see everything without being seen. Or so she thought. The ceremony hall was breathtaking. Hundreds of candles lined the walls, their flames bending toward the center, where a raised dais stood beneath an opening in the ceiling. Through it, the blood moon hung heavy and red, bathing everything in its ancient light. Wolves from every pack in the Dominion stood in precise formation, alphas in black and silver at the front, betas in their formal leathers behind them, and omegas. Omegas were nowhere to be seen, because omegas were never meant to witness this. At the center of it all, standing before the altar with his back to the crowd, was Abel Nuke. Even from this distance, his presence commanded the room. He wore black ceremonial armor that caught the moonlight, a cloak of wolf fur draped across his broad shoulders. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp lines of his face, severe, controlled, utterly unreadable. The high priestess raised her arms, and the music swelled. Under the blood moon, the Alpha King will choose his queen. Let fate guide his hand. Let the moon bear witness. Sarah's breath caught. This was the moment, the choice that would reshape the Dominion. But instead of stepping forward, instead of approaching the line of noble females who waited with practiced grace and calculated smiles, Abel Nuke went completely still. The music faltered. Silence crashed through the hall like a physical force. And then, slowly, deliberately, the Alpha King turned. His eyes swept the crowd, moving past the assembled alphas, past the council elders in their ceremonial robes, past everything and everyone, until they locked directly on Sarah. The world stopped breathing. "You." His voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk, deep, commanding, absolute. By the door. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand frozen as every head in the hall turned to follow the Alpha King's gaze. Whispers erupted like fire catching dry grass. An Omega. At the ceremony. Who let her in? The council members exchanged sharp glances, their faces tight with shock and barely concealed outrage. One elder stepped forward, his voice strained with forced diplomacy. Your Majesty, surely there's been a mistake. That girl is... I know what she is. Abel's words were quiet, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. And then he moved, not toward the altar, not toward the noble females who stood waiting, their perfect composure beginning to crack, toward Sarah. Each step echoed in the vast hall. The crowd parted without being asked, instinct driving them back from their king's path. Sarah pressed harder against the stone column, her wolf stirring beneath her skin. Not in strength, but in panic. He was coming for her. The Alpha King was walking away from his destiny, away from his ceremony, away from everything, to reach the forbidden Omega by the door. He stopped 3 paces away. Up close he was overwhelming. All winter steel and smoke, power barely contained beneath that controlled exterior. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in her life. You're trembling, he said quietly. Not an accusation, an observation. Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. I'm not meant to be here, my king. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, but something she couldn't name. His brow creased slightly, as though her words had confused rather than reassured him. Who forbade you? The question struck her like a physical blow. No one had ever asked her that. They'd simply told her what she couldn't do, where she couldn't go, what she would never be allowed to become. Before she could answer, a sharp voice cut through the moment. Your Majesty. Lady Morwen swept forward, her face a perfect mask of concern and apology. Forgive this disruption. This girl is under my care, and she's unwell, confused. Let me remove her immediately so the ceremony can continue. She reached for Sarah's arm, her fingers digging in with concealed fury. Abel's hand moved faster. He didn't touch Sarah, didn't need to. He simply stepped between them, his presence a wall that Lady Morwen couldn't cross without openly defying her king. You will stay, Abel Nuke said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Above them, through the open ceiling, the blood moon pulsed brighter, as though the ancient power that governed their world had just witnessed something it had been waiting centuries to see. And deep in Sarah's chest, where her half-formed wolf lived in constant fear, something stirred, something that felt almost like hope. The ceremony hall erupted into chaos the moment Abel spoke those 3 words. Your Majesty, this is unprecedented. An Omega at the mating ceremony violates every tradition. Abel raised one hand, and silence fell like a curtain. The ceremony is suspended. Council, you will remain. Everyone else, dismissed. The command left no room for argument. Nobles and pack members filed out in tense silence, their whispers following them like shadows. Sarah stood frozen, acutely aware of every eye that passed over her. Some curious, most contemptuous, all disbelieving. Lady Morwen lingered near the doorway, her face a mask of maternal concern that didn't reach her eyes. Your Majesty, If I might speak regarding my ward. Later. Abel's tone was polite, but final. Leave us. The dismissal hung in the air until Lady Morwen had no choice but to curtsy and retreat, though her gaze promised Sarah that this conversation was far from over. When the last footsteps faded, Abel gestured toward a carved bench near the dais, positioned away from the council members who clustered in heated discussion at the far end of the hall. Sit, please. Sarah's legs moved before her mind caught up, carrying her to the bench. She perched on its edge, hands clasped in her lap to stop their shaking. The moon-marked pendant felt heavy against her chest, a small anchor in a world that had just tilted sideways. Abel moved to a nearby table, returning moments later with a silver goblet. Water. She stared at it, then at him. The Alpha King of the Northern Dominion was offering her water with his own hands. You look as though you might faint, he said simply. Drink. Sarah took the goblet, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. The touch sent a shock through her, not painful, but startling in its warmth. She drank, the cool water steadying her racing thoughts. Thank you, my king. Abel. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, not too close, but near enough that she caught his scent again. Smoke and winter steel, with something underneath like pine forests after rain. When we're speaking directly, you may call me Abel. The informality felt dangerous, intimate. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Behind them, the council's debate grew louder. Sarah caught fragments. Disrespect to tradition, weak bloodlines, setting a precedent. Each word struck like a stone, but Abel seemed entirely unconcerned, his attention fixed solely on her. You didn't answer my question before, he said quietly. Who forbade you from attending the ceremony? Lady Morwen. The name came out barely above a whisper. My guardian. She said it would be cruel to give me false hope, that with my condition, I don't belong among the others. Your condition? It wasn't a question, but Sarah found herself answering anyway. I've never fully shifted. My wolf is incomplete, half-formed. They say it's a sign of weakness, of impure bloodlines. In a world where strength is everything, She trailed off, unable to finish. Different, Abel supplied. But the way he said it didn't sound like an insult. Sarah looked up, meeting his storm-gray eyes for the first time, with something other than fear. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. He leaned back slightly, his posture relaxing in a way that made him seem less like a king and more like a man. I notice things others miss. It's why I listen more than I speak. In this court, words are weapons. Everyone has an agenda, a strategy, a careful performance. His gaze held hers. But you weren't performing tonight. You were simply present. I wasn't supposed to be present at all. And yet you came anyway. Something almost like approval flickered across his features. Why? No one had ever asked her that either. What she wanted, why she made the choices she did. Because I was tired of being invisible, Sarah admitted, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. Tired of watching life happen to everyone else while I stayed locked away. I know I'm not strong like the others. I know my wolf is broken, but I thought, maybe just once, I could stand in the same room and pretend I belonged. The vulnerability of the confession left her breathless. She'd given him the perfect weapon to hurt her, and she couldn't take it back. But Abel didn't wield it like a blade. Instead, his expression softened, barely perceptible, But there. Your wolf isn't broken. You don't know that. I know that every creature in this hall tonight was performing exactly as expected, saying the right words, wearing the right masks, playing their parts in a ritual as old as time itself. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made her chest ache. Except you. You came here afraid, uncertain, expecting to be rejected, and you came anyway. That's not weakness, Sarah. That's courage. Her name on his lips sent warmth flooding through her. Not the fire of passion, but something gentler. Recognition. A council member approached, interrupting the moment. Your Majesty, we must discuss the ceremony's continuation. Tomorrow, Abel said, not looking away from Sarah. Tonight, I have more important matters to attend to. The elder retreated, muttering under his breath. Abel rose, extending his hand to her, not commanding, but offering. Come. The hall is cold, and you're still trembling. Let's speak somewhere more comfortable. Sarah placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of a warrior's training, the strength that could crush but instead held her gently. As he helped her to her feet, steadying her when her knees threatened to buckle, he spoke again, soft enough that only she could hear. You are not invisible, Sarah. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed it. Abel led Sarah to a smaller chamber, adjacent to the great hall, a private study warmed by a crackling hearth. Maps lined the walls, and a simple table held remnants of a working meal. This was where the Alpha King planned his strategies, she realized, where he carried the weight of the Dominion alone. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. You're still cold. She was, though she hadn't realized it until now. The warmth of the flames seeped into her bones as Abel moved to pour wine, but a commotion outside the door interrupted him. My king. A guard stumbled into the room, clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers, and his face was pale with pain. Forgive the intrusion. Patrol skirmish at the eastern border. The healer is attending to others. I only need... Let me see. Sarah was on her feet before she'd made the conscious decision to move. The guard's eyes widened, but she was already guiding him to the chair she'd just vacated, her hands steady despite everything that had happened tonight. Abel watched in silence as she examined the wound. A deep gash, but clean. It needs binding, she said softly. Do you have supplies? Abel produced a healing kit from a cabinet without question. Sarah worked quickly, her movements efficient and gentle. The guard's breathing steadied as she cleaned and wrapped the wound, her touch somehow easing pain that should have made him flinch. How did you... the guard began, but Sarah shook her head. Just pressure in the right places. You'll need proper healing in the morning, but this will hold. She stepped back, and the guard bowed deeply to both of them before departing. Sarah turned to find Abel studying her with an expression she couldn't read. You didn't hesitate, he observed. He was hurt. She said it as though it were the simplest thing in the world. Should I have? Instead of answering, Abel poured 2 goblets of wine and handed her one. When did you learn healing? I didn't, really. Not formally. Sarah cradled the goblet, staring into the deep red liquid. But when you're considered useless for anything else, you find ways to be helpful. Animals calm when I'm near them. Small wounds close faster under my care. I thought it was just attentiveness. It's more than that. Abel settled into the chair across from her, firelight casting shadows across his face. for the first time. He looked tired, not physically, but soul deep. I've ruled this dominion for 8 years. In that time, I've learned that power commands obedience, but it doesn't inspire trust. People fear me because I've made them fear me. It's effective. It's also, he paused, searching for the word, lonely. The confession hung between them, vulnerable in a way Sarah suspected the Alpha King rarely allowed himself to be. Fear keeps them in line, she said quietly, but it also keeps them at a distance. You can't rule through fear and expect to be loved. I never expected to be loved. His gray eyes met hers. I expected to be respected, obeyed. That should have been enough. But it isn't. No. The admission seemed to cost him something. It isn't. Sarah set down her goblet, her hands folded in her lap. I've spent my whole life being dismissed, overlooked, locked away. I could resent every person who ever made me feel small, every rule that said I wasn't enough. But what would that change? Resentment is just another kind of prison. Abel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his full attention on her. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know, but not this. His voice dropped lower. Not someone who makes the air itself feel different when she enters a room. Sarah's breath caught. I'm not. You don't feel it? Abel's gaze intensified. The way the atmosphere shifted when you stood at that doorway tonight. The way even the moon seemed to respond when I chose you to stay. She wanted to deny it, but something in her chest stirred. That same half-formed wolf that lived in constant fear. Now pressing against her ribs with something that felt almost like recognition. I'm just an omega, she whispered. Perhaps. Abel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the moon-marked pendant at her throat. Or perhaps you're something no one has bothered to look closely enough to see. The touch sent warmth radiating from the pendant through her entire body. For just a moment, the room seemed brighter, the fire dancing higher, the very air humming with energy that hadn't been there before. Abel pulled back, his expression shifting from curiosity to something darker. Concern. Does that happen often, when someone touches your pendant? No one ever has, except my mother, before she died. Before Abel could respond, a shadow shifted beyond the doorway. Sarah caught a glimpse of pale fabric, of a familiar figure watching from the darkened corridor. Lady Morwen. Her guardian stepped into the firelight, just enough for Sarah to see her face, and the cold calculation in her eyes was more frightening than any anger. How touching, Lady Morwen said, her voice carrying despite the whisper. The broken little Omega playing healer and confidant to the king himself. Then she looked directly at Sarah, and her smile was a blade wrapped in silk. Enjoy this moment, my dear, because you don't know what you are, and when you finally learn, it will destroy everything you've touched. She disappeared back into shadow, leaving her words hanging in the air like poison. The council convened at dawn, and their voices carried through the palace corridors like thunder before a storm. Sarah woke to them, sharp, angry, unyielding. She'd spent the night in a guest chamber Abel had arranged, far more comfortable than anywhere she'd slept in years, but rest had been impossible. Lady Morwen's words circled her mind like carrion birds. You don't know what you are. What did that mean? A knock at her door brought Mira, carrying breakfast and wearing an expression caught between excitement and dread. The whole palace is talking about you, Mira said, setting down the tray. The Alpha King halted the mating ceremony. For an Omega. Sarah, do you understand what you've done? I didn't do anything. I just stood there. You stood where you weren't supposed to be, and he noticed you. Mira gripped her hands. Half the court thinks it's romantic. The other half thinks it's the end of the Dominion. Through the window, Sarah could see wolves gathering in the courtyard, council members in their formal robes, pack elders with faces carved from disapproval, and nobles whose carefully arranged futures had just been upended. All because Abel Nuke had looked at her. They're going to demand he choose someone else, Sarah said quietly. Someone suitable. Mira's silence was answer enough. Sarah wasn't summoned to the council meeting, but she heard it anyway, stationed outside the chamber doors, where servants brought refreshments, invisible as always. The perfect place to learn truths no one meant her to hear. The law is absolute, Your Majesty. That was Elder Thane, his voice heavy with barely restrained fury. No Omega has ever held the position of queen. They lack the strength, the wolf presence, the authority required to... To what? Abel's voice cut through like winter ice. To rule beside me, to command respect. You speak of strength as though it only comes in one form. We speak of tradition, another elder interrupted, of bloodlines and stability. An Omega Queen would be seen as weakness, an invitation for rival packs to test our borders. You cannot afford sentiment when the Dominion's security is at stake. Sentiment? Abel's tone went dangerously quiet. You believe that's what this is? What else could it be? Elder Thane pressed. You halted a sacred ceremony for a girl you'd never met. A half-shifted Omega with no family, no status, no... Enough. The single word silenced them all. I will take your counsel under advisement, Abel said, each word precisely measured. This meeting is adjourned. Sarah slipped away before the doors opened, but not before she heard Elder Thane's parting words, spoken low to his companions. Let him keep her for now. Omegas are useful sacrifices when the time comes. Better she than someone who actually matters. The words struck like physical blows. Useful sacrifice. Was that what she was? A temporary indulgence the Alpha King would discard when political pressure became too great. She was returning to her chamber when Lady Morwen appeared, blocking the corridor with calculated precision. My dear ward. Her smile was poison wrapped in honey. I wondered when we'd have a moment alone. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her pendant. I did nothing wrong. Didn't you? Lady Morwen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. You defied my protection. Infiltrated a sacred ceremony, and now you've bewitched the Alpha King himself. Do you think this ends well for you? He asked me to stay. I didn't bewitch anyone. No. Lady Morwen's eyes gleamed with something dark. Then explain why the air changes when you enter a room. Why animals calm at your touch. Why the moon itself seemed to respond when he acknowledged you. She leaned in, her breath cold against Sarah's ear. You're waking up, little Omega. And when you fully awaken, you'll destroy everything, including him. I don't understand. You will. Lady Morwen pulled back, her composure sliding into place like a mask. And when that moment comes, you'll have a choice. Disappear quietly and spare him, or stay and watch him fall because of you. She swept past, leaving Sarah trembling in the empty corridor. Sarah found Abel in his study that evening, staring at maps he wasn't really seeing. He looked up when she entered, something in his expression easing, but not enough. They want you to choose someone else, Sarah said without preamble. Someone suitable. Abel set down the document he'd been holding. I know, And they're right. The words tasted like ash. I'm not. I can't be what you need, what the Dominion needs. Sarah. No, please listen. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I've been chosen once before. Chosen to be useful when convenient, discarded when not. My father chose to protect me, then died and left me with a guardian who locks me away. Every choice anyone's made about my life has been for their benefit, not mine. Her voice cracked. How do I know this isn't the same? That you won't decide I'm too much trouble when the council's pressure becomes unbearable. Abel crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming, not with dominance, but with intensity that stole her breath. I don't know how to make you believe me, he said, his voice raw. I don't know how to prove that what I feel when I look at you isn't sentiment or strategy or anything the council thinks they understand. But I am trying, Sarah, against everything I was taught, everything that's expected of me. I'm trying. Trying might not be enough. Then what is? Before she could answer, a horn blast shattered the night, long, urgent, terrible. The warning call. Abel's head snapped toward the window. In the distance, flames were rising. Shouts echoed across the palace grounds. The gates! Someone screamed from the courtyard below. The gates have been breached. The blood moon hung above them, red and full and watching. And Sarah's pendant, for the first time since her mother died, began to burn against her skin. Chaos descended on the palace like a plague. Abel was moving before Sarah could process what was happening, his warrior's instincts taking over. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. He was already strapping on weapons, his face transformed from the contemplative man she'd been speaking with into the Alpha King who commanded armies. Abel, lock the door. He paused at the threshold, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest ache. I will come back for you. Then he was gone. His boots echoing down the corridor as he bellowed orders to the guards converging from all directions. Sarah moved to obey, her hand on the heavy oak door, when she heard it, a scream, high and terrified, coming from deeper within the palace. A servant's voice, a woman. Her instincts warred with Abel's command. She should stay, she should hide. But someone was hurt. Sarah grabbed a candlestick, pathetic as weapons went, but better than nothing, and slipped into the corridor. Smoke was beginning to curl through the passages, acrid and thick. The sounds of combat echoed from the main halls, steel on steel, snarls of wolves in their shifted forms, the terrible sounds of dying. She followed the screaming toward the eastern wing, the oldest part of the palace where few ventured anymore. The air grew colder here, the shadows deeper. The blood moon's light filtered through narrow windows, painting everything in shades of crimson. Please, someone help! The scream cut off abruptly. Sarah's heart hammered as she rounded the corner and stopped dead. Lady Morwen stood in the center of the corridor, perfectly composed despite the chaos consuming the rest of the palace. Her dress was immaculate, not a hair out of place. And at her feet lay the servant who'd been screaming, unconscious but breathing. Sarah. Lady Morwen's smile was gentle, almost maternal. I was hoping you'd come. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to run. What have you done? What needed to be done? Lady Morwen gestured and figures emerged from the shadows, wolves in partial shift, their eyes gleaming with predatory intent. Not palace guards, rogues. The Alpha King has become distracted, weakened by sentiment, The Dominion requires stronger leadership. Leadership that understands what you truly are and how to use it. Sarah backed away, but there were figures behind her now too. She was surrounded. I don't understand. You're behind the attack. I'm behind the solution. Lady Morwen stepped closer, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something simple to a child. For years, I've waited, watched, ensured you remained dormant, unaware, locked away where your power couldn't accidentally manifest. Your father was a fool. He should have ended you when your mother died. But he loved you, and love makes people weak. My mother? Sarah's voice cracked. What do you know about my mother? Everything. Lady Morwen's eyes glittered in the moonlight. I was there when she died, Sarah. I was there when she made me promise to keep you safe, to keep you hidden. And I have. Oh, how I have. But you couldn't stay in your cage, could you? You had to attend that ceremony, had to let the Alpha King see you, had to start waking up. The pendant against Sarah's chest was burning now, hot enough that she gasped. Lady Morwen's gaze fixed on it with hungry recognition. There it is, she whispered. The moon's mark, beginning to activate. I don't know what you're talking about. You were never meant to awaken, Sarah. Lady Morwen's composure finally cracked, revealing the ambition and resentment that had festered beneath. Moon-bound Omegas are supposed to be legend, extinct, gone for 3 centuries. But your mother was one, and she passed it to you, that cursed gift that makes you valuable beyond measure and dangerous beyond control. The rogues closed in, their movements coordinated, predatory. When the Alpha King discovers his precious Omega died in the attack, protecting him perhaps, how tragic. He'll be devastated, Lady Morwen continued, vulnerable, and I'll be there to help him through his grief, to guide him, to become what you could never be. Sarah's mind raced. She could scream, but who would hear over the battle raging in the main halls? She could run, but they'd catch her in seconds. She could fight, but her half-formed wolf was useless against trained killers. You're going to kill me. The words came out steadier than she felt. Not kill, dear child. Contain. There are those who would pay fortunes for a moon-bound Omega, even a dormant one. And if you happen to die in the process of extraction, Lady Morwen shrugged. Well, these things happen during palace attacks. The rogues lunged. Sarah threw up her hands instinctively, a futile gesture of defense. The candlestick clattered to the floor. Terror flooded her system, not for herself, but for Abel. He would return to find her gone, would blame himself, would never know the truth. No. The word echoed through her mind, with a force that didn't feel entirely her own. The pendant flared white-hot against her skin, and something inside Sarah, something that had been sleeping for 23 years, something her mother had passed down through bloodlines stretching back centuries, something that had been waiting for this exact moment of desperate need, stirred. The air in the corridor changed, thickened, hummed with energy that tasted like moonlight and midnight and ancient power. The rogues froze mid-lunge, their eyes widening in sudden primal fear. Lady Morwen stumbled backward, her composure shattering. No, not yet. You're not ready. You can't be. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was drowning in sensation, in power that surged through her veins like liquid starlight, in awareness that expanded beyond her body to touch every living thing in the palace, in connection to something vast and ancient and impossibly strong. Her wolf rose, not the half-formed, frightened creature that had lived beneath her skin her whole life, but something else entirely. Above the palace, the blood moon pulsed brighter, as though recognizing one of its own, as though answering a call it had been waiting centuries to hear. And in the eastern corridor, surrounded by enemies and betrayed by the woman who was supposed to protect her, Sarah finally understood what she was, what she'd always been. The moon had answered her fear. Now it waited to see what she would do with its gift. The power didn't explode from Sarah, it bloomed. Like moonlight breaking through storm clouds, like the first breath of spring after endless winter, it unfurled through the eastern corridor with a presence that was overwhelming, not in its violence, but in its completeness. Sarah's wolf rose, not with claws and fangs, not with the savage physicality she'd seen in other shifters. This was something else, entirely. Something the world had forgotten how to recognize. The air itself responded. The shadows deepened and lightened simultaneously, as though darkness and illumination had learned to coexist. The blood moon's light intensified, pouring through the narrow windows in waves that made the stone walls hum with resonance. And at the center of it all stood Sarah, her pale hair lifting in a wind that existed only around her, her eyes reflecting moonlight that came from within rather than without. The rogues collapsed, not wounded, not dead, simply overwhelmed. They fell to their knees, gasping, their partial shifts dissolving, as though their wolves couldn't maintain form in the presence of something so fundamentally other. Their eyes rolled back, consciousness fleeing, before a force that didn't demand submission. It simply was, and that was enough. Lady Morwen staggered against the wall, her face twisted between terror and awe. "Moonbound," she whispered, the word half prayer, half curse. "True moonbound. I thought I had more time. I thought you'd need years to awaken fully." Sarah turned to face her guardian, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. Layers of sound that resonated with something ancient and patient and absolutely unyielding. "You were wrong." The two words hung in the air like a judgment. Lady Morwen's composure, already fractured, shattered completely. She dropped to her knees, not in reverence, but in instinctive response to a power that operated on levels deeper than conscious thought. "I only wanted. The Dominion needs. You don't understand the danger you pose." "No." Sarah stepped forward, and the moonlight moved with her, a corona of silver-white energy that made the very air shimmer. "You wanted control. You wanted to use what I am for your own ambition. You locked me away not to protect me, but to keep me dormant, to keep me weak." She stopped directly in front of Lady Morwen, looking down at the woman who had spent years making her feel small, broken, worthless. "You said I didn't know what I was," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the power coursing through her veins like lightning in her blood. "You were right. But I'm learning." Lady Morwen's eyes widened. "Please. Sarah, I raised you. I kept you safe. You kept me caged." Sarah's hand moved to the moon-marked pendant at her throat, and it blazed with light that made Lady Morwen flinch. "Leave. Take your rogues and leave this palace. If I ever see you in the Dominion again, the moon will not be as merciful as I'm being now." It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who finally understood the scope of their own power. Lady Morwen scrambled backward, her elegant facade completely gone. "The Council will never accept. Go." The command resonated through the corridor with physical force. Lady Morwen fled, her rogues dragging themselves to their feet and following, their retreat marked by the sounds of scrambling fear. And then, Sarah was alone. The power didn't leave. It settled, sinking back beneath her skin like the tide retreating from shore. But it didn't disappear. She could feel it now, always there, always accessible. Her wolf, her true wolf, finally complete. Not the frightened, half-formed creature she'd lived with for 23 years, but something balanced, whole. Her legs gave out. Sarah sank to the floor. Trembling not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. The pendant cooled against her skin, its work done. Around her, the corridor returned to normal. Shadows were just shadows again. Moonlight just light. But she would never be just anything again. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard the footsteps, running, urgent, accompanied by the metallic scent of battle. Then Abel was there, skidding to a halt in the corridor's entrance, his armor splashed with blood that wasn't his own, his expression wild with barely controlled panic. Sarah. He saw her on the floor and crossed the distance in a heartbeat, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands moved over her, checking for wounds, for injuries, his controlled composure cracking under the weight of obvious fear. "I'm not hurt," she managed, her voice hoarse. "I'm not. Abel, I'm okay. The rogues in this corridor, someone said they saw Lady Morwen." He stopped, finally registering her face, her eyes, the way the air still seemed to shimmer faintly around her. What happened? Sarah looked at him. This Alpha King who had chosen her when no one else would, who had defended her presence despite opposition, who had asked what she wanted for perhaps the first time in her life. "I awakened," she whispered. "Abel, I'm not what everyone thought. I'm not broken. I'm moonbound." The word fell from his lips with quiet reverence. He sat back on his heels, his grey eyes searching hers. "I've read the legends. Omegas who could command the moon's energy, who served as balance between wolf and magic, strength and wisdom. They disappeared 300 years ago. The council said they were myths. They weren't myths." Sarah's hands shook as she pushed herself more upright. "My mother was one. She passed it to me. Lady Morwen knew. She's been keeping me dormant, keeping me locked away so I wouldn't awaken. Tonight, when the rogues attacked." She trailed off, unable to find words for what had happened. Abel reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle despite the strength behind it, grounding despite the chaos still echoing through the palace beyond. "You are not broken," he said fiercely, his voice rough with emotion. "You never were. You are balance, Sarah. Perfect, terrifying, impossible balance." Tears she hadn't realized were falling, slipped down her cheeks. "The council will never accept this. A moonbound Omega as queen. They'll fight it even harder now. Let them." Abel's thumb brushed away her tears. "I chose you before I knew what you were. Finding out you're powerful beyond measure only confirms what I already felt." "Which is?" He smiled, truly smiled, not the controlled expression he showed the court, but something genuine and vulnerable and entirely for her. "That you're the only person in this entire dominion who makes me want to be more than the crown I wear." Above them, through the narrow window, the blood moon watched. And for the first time in 3 centuries, it recognized one of its chosen children standing not alone, but with someone who saw her as she truly was, balanced, powerful, whole. The palace stood in the aftermath of battle as dawn threatened the horizon. Fires had been extinguished, wounded tended, and the rogues who survived were locked in the dungeon awaiting judgment. But the blood moon remained, impossibly, unnaturally, still full and crimson above them, as though refusing to set until something was resolved. Abel summoned the full council at first light. Not a request, a command. They gathered in the great hall, the same space where the mating ceremony had been interrupted 3 nights ago. Council members who'd spent hours debating Sarah's unsuitability now stood in tense silence, their faces marked by exhaustion and barely concealed fear. Word of what had happened in the eastern corridor had spread like wildfire. The broken Omega had awakened. Sarah stood beside Abel at the center of the hall, beneath the opening where moonlight still poured through despite the approaching sun. She wore a simple dress, no coronation robes, no symbols of status, but the moon-marked pendant gleamed at her throat, and the air around her held a quality that made even the most dismissive elders unable to look away. She was changed. Anyone with eyes could see it. Elder Thane stepped forward, his face carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, we are relieved to see you unharmed after last night's treachery. Lady Morwen's betrayal has been unprecedented." "Lady Morwen," Abel said coldly, "orchestrated an attack on this palace, attempted to abduct an Omega under my protection, and revealed herself to be a traitor to the Dominion. She has been exiled beyond our borders. Any who offer her shelter will be considered enemies of the crown." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly, but Sarah could feel their tension. This wasn't why Abel had summoned them, and they knew it. "However," Abel continued, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an Alpha King, "Lady Morwen's crimes are not the primary reason you're here." He turned to Sarah, and the gesture drew every eye in the hall to her. 3 nights ago, I halted the mating ceremony. You called it sentiment, weakness, a dangerous break from tradition. Abel's gaze swept the council. You demanded I choose a suitable queen, someone strong, someone with proper lineage, someone who would reinforce the Dominion's power through traditional means. Elder Thane shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, in light of recent events. In light of recent events, Abel interrupted, you now know what she is. Moonbound, the first in 300 years. A power the Dominion hasn't seen since the Age of Legends. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. And still, some of you would have me set her aside because she's an Omega, because she doesn't fit your narrow definition of strength. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Abel took Sarah's hand, the gesture simple but profound. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and steady. I don't choose Sarah because of what she is, he said, his voice softening but losing none of its conviction. I choose her because of who she is. Because she has more courage in her smallest gesture than most warriors show in a lifetime. Because she sees the world not as something to dominate, but as something to heal. Because when I'm with her, I remember that strength isn't only about control. It's about trust. He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand, the blood moon's light falling across both of them like a blessing. Sarah, Abel said, and the formal distance dropped from his voice, leaving only the man beneath the crown. I'm asking, not commanding. I'm choosing, not claiming. Will you stand beside me? Not as someone elevated to my status, but as my equal, my balance, my mate. Sarah's breath caught. The council faded into background noise. The palace, the politics, the expectations, all of it fell away until there was only this moment. Only his grey eyes searching hers, vulnerable and honest and completely open. Yes, she whispered. Then, stronger. Yes. The word had barely left her lips when the blood moon pulsed. Light flooded the hall, not harsh, but encompassing. Silver-white energy that wove between Sarah and Abel like visible threads, connecting them in ways that went deeper than physical touch. The mating bond, forming not through dominance or submission, but through mutual choice, through consent freely given. Sarah gasped as she felt it, felt him. His strength, yes, but also his loneliness. His determination shadowed by doubt. His fierce protectiveness wrapped around a core of surprising gentleness. Everything he was flowed into her awareness, and she knew without question that he felt her in return. Her kindness, her resilience, her power that she was only beginning to understand. They were separate beings still, but connected now in ways that couldn't be severed by law or tradition or opposition. The bond settled, the light fading to a gentle glow that lingered around their joined hands. Elder Thane's voice broke the stunned silence. The moon has accepted. The moon has agreed, another elder whispered, or replacing skepticism. Because it had. For the first time in living memory, the blood moon had borne witness to a mating and responded with visible confirmation. The legend said it had been common once, when moon-bound omegas walked the realm, when balance was honored rather than feared. Abel lifted Sarah's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was both courtly and intimate. Then it's decided. Sarah is my mate, my queen, and anyone who challenges that challenges me directly. The threat hung in the air, but it was almost unnecessary. The council had seen the moon's response. They'd witnessed power they couldn't deny or explain away. Slowly, one by one, they knelt. Not in fear, not even entirely in acceptance, but in recognition that something had fundamentally shifted in the Dominion, that the old ways had met something ancient and been found incomplete. Sarah looked down at the assembled council, then up at Abel beside her, the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had chosen her when she was forbidden, who had offered her not elevation, but partnership. Together, she said softly, meant only for him. His smile was answer enough. Together. Above them, finally satisfied, the blood moon began to set, but its light remained in the mating bond between them, permanent, unbreakable, and freely chosen. For the first time in 300 years, the moon had agreed, and the Dominion would never be the same. Spring came to the Northern Dominion with a softness no one expected. The snows melted earlier than usual, revealing meadows of wildflowers that hadn't bloomed in years. Animals ventured closer to pack settlements, unafraid, and throughout the realm, whispers carried of the moon-bound queen who ruled beside the Alpha King, not behind him, not beneath him, but beside him in true partnership. Sarah stood in the same corridor where she'd once been locked away, but the heavy door had been removed months ago. Now it opened freely onto gardens she'd helped design, spaces where omegas could gather without shame, where strength was measured in more than physical dominance, where balance was finally understood as power rather than weakness. Your Majesty, a young omega approached hesitantly, her eyes downcast in habitual deference. Sarah, she corrected gently as she always did. Just Sarah, when we're speaking directly. The girl looked up, surprised and hopeful in equal measure. Sarah, then. The delegation from the Eastern Ridge has arrived. They're asking about the new Omega protections you proposed. Tell them I'll meet them in the council chamber shortly. Sarah smiled. And Lyra? Walk with your head up. You have every right to be here. The girl, Lyra, nodded, her posture straightening slightly as she departed. Small changes, Sarah had learned, but meaningful ones. The Dominion was shifting, not overnight, but steadily. Laws that had kept Omegas subjugated for generations were being rewritten. Pack hierarchies that relied solely on dominance were being restructured to value wisdom, empathy, and healing, alongside traditional strength. Not everyone welcomed the changes, but fewer opposed them now than in those first turbulent months after the blood moon ceremony. "There you are." Abel's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. "I should have known you'd be in the gardens." Sarah turned to find her mate leaning against the doorframe, still wearing his formal council robes, but with an ease that hadn't been there when she'd first met him. The weight he carried was still immense. Ruling always would be, but he no longer carried it alone. "The Eastern Ridge delegation," she asked, "can wait another few minutes." He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms with a familiarity that still made her heart skip. "I wanted to steal a moment before we're consumed by politics again." Sarah relaxed into his embrace, breathing in his scent, smoke and winter steel, now mixed with the pine soap she'd introduced to the palace. "You're getting sentimental in your old age, Alpha King. You're a terrible influence." But he was smiling as he said it. That genuine expression she'd learned to coax out more frequently. "I've been thinking about that night. The ceremony." "Which part? The part where you stopped everything to acknowledge a forbidden Omega, or the part where said Omega nearly got abducted by her own guardian? The part where you stood by the door." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Trembling and terrified, but there anyway. "I knew in that moment, before I understood what you were, before the power awakened, I knew you were extraordinary." "You knew I was different," Sarah corrected. "Extraordinary came later." "No." Abel's gray eyes held hers, with the intensity that still made her breath catch. "You were always extraordinary. The world just refused to see it. I'm grateful I was smart enough to look." Sarah rose on her toes to kiss him, a soft press of lips that deepened into something more profound. The mating bond hummed between them, that constant awareness of each other's presence and emotional state. She could feel his contentment, his love, his absolute certainty that they were right. When they finally pulled apart, Abel rested his forehead against hers. "The council's waiting. Eastern Ridge, then the territorial disputes, then the new trade agreements. Then dinner," Sarah finished. "Just us. I'm declaring it by royal decree." "Abusing your power already, my queen?" "Learning from the best." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers as they'd done that night under the blood moon. "Come on. Let's go change the world some more." They walked together through corridors that had once felt like a prison to Sarah, past windows where she'd watched life happen to other people, through halls where her very presence had once been forbidden. But she wasn't that girl anymore. The half-formed Omega who'd been locked away, dismissed as broken, told she was weakness incarnate. That girl had awakened into something the Dominion had forgotten could exist. Not despite her Omega nature, but because of it. Moonbound Omegas weren't weak. They were balance made manifest. They were the bridge between raw power and wisdom, between dominance and compassion. They were what the world needed, even when it didn't know to ask for them. In the council chamber, the Eastern Ridge delegation rose as she and Abel entered. Some faces held skepticism. Others showed calculation, but all showed respect. They might not fully understand what a moonbound queen meant, but they recognized power when they saw it. And more importantly, They recognized partnership. Abel took his seat, and Sarah took hers, not at his feet, not in the shadows, but beside him at the head of the table. Two rulers, different in nature, but equal in authority. Balance. As the meeting began, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished surface of the table. Pale hair crowned with the simple silver circlet Abel had commissioned. No ostentatious gems, just a crescent moon cradling a star, matching her mother's pendant. Her eyes were clear, confident, no longer haunted by the fear of being unseen. She thought of that girl by the door, the one who'd stood trembling in the shadows, certain she had no right to exist in spaces meant for others, the one who'd believed the lies about being broken, unbalanced, worthless. "I see you," Sarah thought to that younger self, "and you were never any of those things." That night, after the council meetings and diplomatic negotiations, after the formal dinner and the endless stream of petitions and requests, Sarah and Abel found themselves alone in their private chambers. The moon, not blood red now, but silver and serene, shone through the windows. Abel pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her from behind, as they stood looking out at the dominion spread below them. Their dominion now, changed and changing still. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The attention, the responsibility, the constant scrutiny." Sarah leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through the mating bond. "Do you regret choosing me?" "Never." "Then no, I don't regret being seen, being chosen, being here." She turned in his arms to face him. "I spent 23 years being told I didn't belong anywhere that mattered. Now I help decide what matters. That's not something I'd ever regret." Abel kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips, gentle and reverent, and full of the love they'd built through crisis and opposition, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept what others said was impossible. "I love you," he whispered against her mouth. "I know." Sarah smiled. "I can feel it, every moment of every day. It's quite inconvenient during council meetings." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "You're terrible." "You love it." "I love you." Later, as they lay tangled together beneath silk sheets, Sarah stared up at the moon through the window and thought about doors, about the ones that had been closed to her, locked against her, used to keep her contained and hidden, about the one she'd stood beside that night, forbidden and forgotten, certain she had no right to anything beyond survival. She'd walked through it anyway, and on the other side, she'd found not just a crown or a title or even power, though those had come. She'd found herself, complete, unbroken, whole. She'd found partnership with someone who saw her worth before the world was forced to acknowledge it. She'd found a place where she belonged, not because she'd earned it through suffering or sacrifice, but simply because she existed. And that was enough. I was forbidden once, Sarah thought as sleep claimed her. Abel's arms secure around her, and the moon watching over them both, but never again. The end. If you enjoyed the story, let me know in the comments. Your voice decides what I write next. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more moonlit love stories like this one.